Okay, well, good morning, everybody, from very sunny Sheffield. I'm really sorry not to be with you in Dublin.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
I was over there a week ago for another conference, and I know that it's a wonderful city, and also I'm very envious of all the music making that you'll be doing over the weekend. So my paper's on Villikins and his Diner, a song which there are probably very few people in the room today who've not come across it before. It's either the song or its tune. It's Roud 271, in case you do the Roud numbers. And you may not have come across it perhaps knowingly, but I'd be prepared to put money on the fact that most of you would know the tune at the very least.
Julia, can I just, I'm doing my best to boost volume here in the room for people who are here, but if you could do anything on your end in terms of being right close to your mic and everything, that would also help.
Right over my laptop.
Sorry about that, sorry.
Cool. So it's one of those ballads that Malcolm Laws dubbed the family opposition to lovers. It results in the suicide of the daughter who poisons herself, and her true love follows suit when he realizes what she's done. So they're united in the grave. Now, the practice of burlesquing serious literary and dramatic works in the sense of caricaturing their style or intention for humorous effect has a long history. With regard to folk song, the study of burlesques of traditional songs is crucial to nuancing our understandings of the ways in which traditional music intersects with other spheres of musical composition, performance, and modes of transmission. As Steve Roud highlights, it requires us to navigate, quote, a maze of song milieu, including the oral tradition, printed sources at all levels, stage representations, commercial pleasure gardens, semi-professional concert rooms, fully professional musical halls, and so on. So one of Steve's briefer examples is Villikins and his Diner and the balladic burlesques William and Diana. And I just want to probably cover some of the same ground today. It's a song that Villikins and his Diner was a song that attained enormous popularity in theatres and music hall, not least because it was associated with the performer Sam Cowell, bars, in homes and on barrel organs. It spurned several plays and numerous performances, imitations and translations, as well as instrumental pieces, and it spread to many parts of the British Empire. So there's a lot to go on here. But my own interest stems from an interest in the tune, actually, when and how it evolved and why it was evolved and composed and how it's continued to be so popular, either in association with this song and indeed many others. So in this paper, I just want to unpack a little bit of the complex histories of William and Diana and Villikins and his Diner by looking at the Broadside evidence in relation to the stage play and the song itself and the tune, just in case there's any light they shed on the early history of the song, its career on and off the stage, and the provenance of its tune. So, first of all, the theatre song. Just a bit of background. So the rise to fame of Villikins and his Diner in the mid-19th century is well known. Briefly, in May 1853, the Royal Olympic Theatre in London staged a revival of a one-act farce called The Wandering Minstrel. It is the tale of a well-to-do couple in Worthing and their encounter with an itinerant street singer, Gembags, whom the wife takes to be a nobleman in disguise. The play reaches its climax with a contest between her niece's lover, who's also in disguise, and Gembags, in which they both sing a ballad. Gembags loses on account of his awful voice, is unmasked and sent packing.
Julia?
Yeah.
We're only, oh, there, okay, sorry. We were only seeing your title slide up to that point, so I was worried.
You like to keep you waiting in suspense, you see, Harry.
That's great, okay, thank you.
Cool, so here we are. So this is Frederick Robson playing the role of Gembags in that production. His real name was Thomas Brownbill, and at this time, the papers really began to notice Robson's performance with great approval. They focused not only on his acting, but particularly comment on his song of Villikins was a Volocking, which was vociferously encored, and the entire conception was highly relished and appreciated by a house that was crowded in every part. We cordially recommend the public to make Gembag's acquaintance, so says the Morning Post. And indeed, there were many other crits that gave him particularly a positive review of his singing of this particular song. However, there are competing accounts as to the nature of the connection between the song and the play. The Wandering Minstrel is a one-act farce written by Henry Mayhew, he of London Labour and the London Poor fame. Although, of course, that came some years later. In 1851, 2 volumes reissued with additions on from 1861. And obviously, I think well known to most of us in the room as a significant study of London working class life in the mid-19th century. He was also involved in the founding of the magazine Punch. But The Wandering Minstrel was his first sort of attempt at stage writing, and it was first performed at the Fitzroy Theatre in London on the 16th of January 1834, so some 20 years before the Robson production that we were talking about first. Now, many authors believe that Robson introduced this song, Villikins and his Diner, into the play for the 1853 revival. But if so, the provenance of the song has not been definitively established. And in fact, there are a number of competing claims. Here are some of them. For example, John Ashton, in his Modern Street Ballads of 1888, in the top right-hand corner, says that the ballad was, during its run, as popular as any street song I remember. It had been forgotten when Robson, that prince of genuine comic actors, introduced it into the farce of The Wandering Minstrel, and it fairly took the town by storm. So that raises the question, did the song form part of the first run of the play, beginning in 1834? And this is what Mayhew appears to suggest in the bottom left-hand corner quotation when he wrote to Notes and Queries in 1883, stating that as Mr. Robson sang the song, the words were those originally given by Mr. Mitchell, the first low comedian who appeared in the parts in AD 1831. He brought the country version to me and I had to condense and interpolate it so as to make it go with a London audience. So this is a bit puzzling. The first performances, as far as we know, were 1834. That's certainly when the first published edition was, and it's reported in the newspapers. So is this amnesia on his part? What's going on here? Still another correspondent to good old Notes and Queries. Whoops, sorry, I've gone mad there, trying to move it up. There we go. He writes in 1883 that the song was written many years previously by a Birmingham man named Henry Horton, who sang it in some of the London music rooms. And there's still another suggestion put forward by Adair Fitzgerald in the Era newspaper in 1913. And this concerns Edward Blanchard, a prolific writer of pantomimes for Drury Lane. The claim is partly based on Blanchard's own reminiscences. And he said that he made up Villikins and his Diner, the burlesque, around 1839 with music by his associate James Howe, claiming the song was first sung by Howe in the part of Gembags in some private performances of The Wandering Minstrel. So all a bit confusing and difficult to marry up, it seems to me. In a previous paper, I examined evidence that the song was known prior to the 1853 production, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But meanwhile, since then, I've actually been able to consult the first edition of the play. Dated 1834, it was published by John Miller as part of his series of Miller's Modern Acting Drama, consisting of the most popular pieces produced at the London theatres. Okay, it's this. It contains an introduction to the play written by Mayhew, in which he mentions that the play has been performed uninterruptedly for upwards of 70 nights, and he commends the actors for their part in its success. He also credits Mitchell, who plays Gembags, for his admirable personation of the minstrel, saying, "Orpheus was nothing to him. Mr. O moved only the rocks and trees, but Mr. M agitated the whole house." But what did he sing? Well, if we look at the printed edition here of the play, there is in fact no particular song specified for Gembags at this point in the play. And I've circled it in red there so you can see for yourselves. The song above, which is performed by Herbert, is given as Hark the Young Troubadour, whereas when Mrs. Crinkham calls on Gembags to sing, the directions are Gembags sings a verse of a comic song, very discordantly, at the conclusion of which Mrs. Crinkham approaches him. So from this evidence, it's possible that Mr. Mitchell sang Villikins or any one of a number of other songs. He could also have sung different songs on different nights. It also appears he was not called on to sing the whole of the song, whatever it was, and he was confined to one verse only. So that puts a bit of a perspective on what we know Robson did with the part in 1853 in the revival at the Olympic Theatre, where, as we'll see, it becomes a much more elaborate thing. Here's another early published copy of the play. It was as performed at the Chestnut Street Theatre in Philadelphia, and it was published in 1836, so not long after the Mayhew edition. Its cover promises several embellishments. Most interestingly for us, the interpolation of several songs not found in the 1834 edition. These include The Hackney Coachman, related to, but not the same as The Devil and the Hackney Coachman, I think, and placed at a point where there's no actual song in the 1834 edition, just the mention of song titles, and presumably intended to make the play more relevant to a Philadelphia audience. At the ballad singing contest itself, there's an emphasis on street songs, inasmuch as Herbert sings The Bloom is on the Rye, which, to judge from Steve's folk song index, is much printed on broadsides, and Jembag sings All Around My Hat. So this version is the kind of comic version of that. Is it another burlesque? It lauds the charms of a vegetable seller. And again, John Ashton, in his Modern Street Ballads of 1888, comments that in the 30s of this century, this was one of the most popular of street songs and is well worth reproducing among the most humorous ballads, as it is utterly unknown to the present generation. Of course, he was writing then in 1888. So the text that Ashton reproduces and found on other printings of this ballad is very similar to this text that's here in the Chestnut Street Theatre edition of The Wandering Minstrel. The Broadside printings, as here in the play text, include imitations of Cockney dialect and brief spoken interpolations, commenting on the action and characters in the song to humorous effect. These interpolations are addressed to the audience of a performance which, when they take place in the context of a play, they break the fourth wall. One wonders if the audience would also have been encouraged to join in the song's chorus, thereby becoming part of Jembag's execrable performance itself. And these things, as we will see, are very relevant to Villikins in its diner itself. So at this point then, there's no evidence of a link between The Wandering Minstrel and Villikins and his diner as a song. But on the other hand, there's evidence that from early on, the songs in the play were regarded as open to tweaking. We also know that the play was popular, and it seems to have been fairly regularly staged on both sides of the Atlantic in the 1830s and 40s. What we don't know is what songs formed part of these other productions. In many accounts and secondary literature, Frederick Robson is generally credited with at least introducing Villikins and his diner into the 1853 revival of the play. So what do we know of the song's existence and its earlier serious form, both at the time of the first performances of The Wandering Minstrel and between then and 1853? Well, first of all, we know that the song was in circulation prior to 1853. In a previous presentation, again, I highlighted its appearance in 1845 in Bentley's Miscellany, an English literary magazine. The preamble to this explains that it's taken from, I'm not going to manage this, Arundinez Kami, or Reeds of the Can, a collection of more than 200 English rhymes, songs, poems and hymns translated into Latin and occasionally Greek by a group of early Victorian Cambridge alumni. The first volume was in 1841, and it suggested that these were in the second volume, which the British Library datings look like that might have been around 1843. So Bentley's Miscellany contains the full text of Villikins and his diner, entitled, as you see, The Romance of Wilkins and Diner. And it's quite interesting to compare this with Broadsides of William and Diner, and also with Villikins and his diner, as presented in the second edition of the play and in the sheet music publications, because I think that Bentley represents a bit of a transitional form. So I know you won't be able to read this probably at speed, but I've done a little bit of sort of textual comparison here between early broadsides of William and Diana and The Romance of Wilkins and Diner, which is well before the performances by Robson, which are captured here in the sheet music of Villikins and his Dinah, published in 1853. So let's have a look. We can see transformations of the text in the Bentley version, including the cocknification of the text. So sort of reading left to right here, we can see that it becomes much more I dialect in the Bentley text as written down. There's the modification of minor plot details here, such as the well-known alteration of Dinah's age to 16, and the addition of the chorus, Rifalderol, etc. It preserves the 8-stanza length of the William and Dinah broadsides, but it omits the stanza devoted to the letter Dinah sends to Villikins that she's going to commit suicide. And instead it introduces a new stanza labelled moral. So it's still the same length, but it's done that by compressing several of the stanzas. But it's not until the even later version, this one taken for the earliest known printing of the sheet music by Campbell, Ransford and Co., that the liquor merchant transforms into the rich merchant. So if I go back a slide, that's in the first stanza there. And a detail consistently found in the print versions of Villikins from the mid-19th century onwards is this rich merchant. And the length is shortened to 7 stanzas through the addition of what appears to be stanzas 2 and 3 in the earlier versions. So the Broadside Index of Steve's lists 218 broadside songstone chapbooks, books, newspapers and other cheap print versions, plus some catalogue entries of the Villikins song. And I confess I've only managed to look at a small number of these. You'll probably be relieved to know that. This one, printed by the Poets Box in Glasgow, 1854, is an elaborate one, and it includes the details of Robson's performance, which was extremely elaborated, as you can see. It had many of the features that we saw earlier with the All Around My Hat performance, but done to the nth degree. Now, I appreciate it's not very clear to read this, but it parallels much that's contained in the sheet music as published by G.H. Davidson around 1855 as part of the Musical Treasury series, and as featured in the 2nd edition of The Wandering Minstrel. Okay, let me see if I can. So this is the, I've only seen the cover page of this, which is in the V&A. So this is the Musical Treasury issue of the sheet music. But even from the opening there, you can see the inflated title of the whole thing, and it's how it's elevated to the celebrated antediluvian and dolefully pathetical lyrical legend of Villikins and his Dinah. And this is what it looks like in the 2nd edition by Miller of the play. This was published as part of Thomas Hales Lacey's acting edition of the plays in 1855-ish again. So here we've got even more extra verses, we've got several more choruses, because it looks from the text as if Robson got the audience to sing, and then the chorus he sings by himself. And not only that, there are other verses in a kind of tongue-in-cheek discovery. We have them recovered from the original Chaldean manuscripts in the British Museum, in which the revenant of Dinah comes back to haunt her father, and there's still another moral. However, that's a lot to get on a broadsheet, isn't it? And I would say that most of the broadsides I've looked at don't go that far. And as can be seen from these 2 examples, which happen to be found side by side in the Firth collection, some include brief asides, but many print the song without them. So that's those interpolations. Notably, though, the chorus is common to them all, suggesting that the tune, whenever this became established, has been preserved. It's always that Turalai, Turalai tune. So just turning to the tune for a brief moment before I finish. Only one of the Villikins broadsides that I've seen names a tune. It's the Poets Box one above, from 1854, and it names it As They Died As They Lived. I'll just go back to that. Where is that one? Poets Box. There, it's that one there. Unfortunately, as far as I know, no one has been able to trace a tune with this name, so we're none the wiser what that tune was. The William and Diana broadsides also do not name a tune, the non-burlesque ones, the originals, if you like. However, starting from about 1850, many other ballads were printed on broadsides in which Villikins and his Dinah is the name tune for the song on the sheet. The Roud Broadside Index contains 107 examples of broadsides with Villikins as the name tune, some of which may be different printings of the same song, but nonetheless it gives you an indication of the proliferation of broadsides now naming this tune. It seems self-evident that this would only be the case if the tune and the song with which it had become associated was widely known and popular, so that people made that connection. It was general knowledge. The earliest documentation we have of the tune is also from this time, and it's the Campbell and Ransford sheet music I showed earlier of 1853. We cannot be sure of the tune for the Bentley Villikins, but the fact that it has the chorus and that its meter fits comfortably with the Villikins and its Dinah tune would suggest that it was sung to this too, so that might put the tune back to the 1843 period. So I'm wondering, is the tune part of the burlesque of William and Diana, or was it associated with the William and Diana beforehand? The jury is still very much out on this one. The melodic evidence we have of William and Diana is from oral tradition and was collected in the late 19th century onwards, so that's not going to be reliable in terms of indicating the melody of the first half of the 19th century. Interestingly, when one tries to perform the William and Diana broadsides to the Villikins tune, the Thompson one has a number of awkward moments where there feel to be too many syllables, whereas the Catnap printing fits easily to the tune. So that's comparing here. The first one doesn't seem to fit so well, but the second one, the Catnap one, that really fits in very well indeed. Because time is a bit short, I won't demonstrate that, and I'll hop onto my conclusions, and so you can try that out later for yourselves. So just to conclude then, Villikins and his Dinah was provably in existence as a burlesque of William and Diana prior to 1853 and Robson. But it's not been possible to prove or disprove the various origin theories that I mentioned earlier. It's not clear if the tune was composed at the same time as part of the burlesque. The author of the burlesque is not known, nor its date of composition, nor how widely it was being performed, or if it had a connection with earlier performances of the Wandering Minstrel. Certainly it seems that the songs used were somehow interchangeably used as part of that production until 1853. Of course, as we've seen, Villikins and his Dinah got that new lease of life with the Robson performances at the Olympic, and also, as I mentioned, Music Hall was taking off at exactly the same time. And we know he was responsible for exaggerating the burlesque elements in his performance for comic effect. But it's really the tune and the chorus that seem to have endured into broadside tradition more than those interpolations, although they do crop up from time to time. It seems that this, and probably the prominence of the song as a staple of Music Hall, as I mentioned earlier, helped to establish it and its associated tune as one item, with the result it was much imitated in subsequent broadsides. And even Sweet Betsy from Pike, which is one of the most famous songs that was composed for this tune, also dates from this period. James Fould dates that to 1858. So my next stop is to have a look at some of the oral versions and a very slight lead that I have on the origin of the melody through the ballad William and Harriet, but that will be the subject of a paper next time. Thank you.
Okay, right. Can you hear me now?
I can, thank you.
Can you hear me, Mother, as I used to say? We had some sound problems at the beginning. You weren't. We were straining to hear you.
Oh, sorry.
So, did you give us the tune? Can you sing the tune to us now, so that we all know which tune we're talking about? Please. Yeah, I can. Just a minute. I'm going to find the broadside that I said it fitted with, and then I'm going to put the words to that. Hold on a second. I mean, most of the people here could probably sing along with it. I'm sure you'll know. You can join in the chorus. It's of a rich liquor merchant in London did dwell. He had but one daughter, a beautiful girl. Her name was called Diana, scarce 14 years old. But she had a large portion in silver and gold, singing Turelai, Urelai, Urelai. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. I heard that in echo form.
Although if you're going to be a street singer, I think you've got to put a bit of oomph into it.
I tried to think what Robson did with it and what the audience did as part of their audience participation.
Yes. Do we have any questions in the hall or on online? So the answer is that you don't know when the tune was written. You don't know when it was at first in the play. You don't. There's a lot you don't know.
There's a lot we don't know. I'm guessing it's not just me. It's very difficult, isn't it, to piece it all together. And I thought maybe I'd found it with that original, finding the first edition of the play. But in fact, it just opens up yet another can of worms, although I suspect this is typical of this type of research.
Jerry's got a question. Yes.
Thanks, Steve. I was just wondering if this is quite tangential, but would Julia know if Wandering Minstrel was a title that was unheard of as a phrase before? Because there's an Irish jig called The Wandering Minstrel. Just wondering if it could be named after the show in the same way that the Hornpipe Pleasures of Hope was named after Campbell's poem.
Yeah, I've tried to look into some of those connections. I mean, I know that the Wandering Minstrel, it's a sort of trope, isn't it? And there's, if you search it in the British Newspaper Archive, as I seem to have spent many late nights doing, probably too many, you get many phrases, and it's very, very interesting to see that, for example, sorry, I'm going to come back to your question in a minute. There was, in fact, there was somebody a few years earlier who did disguise themselves as a wandering minstrel, an aristocratic person, and who did roam the country for people. They were trying to get around the country without being discovered for their aristocratic background and earn enough money to sort of stay afloat, apparently, and it was all reported in the papers. So in some ways, what it looks as though what Mayhew did was quite topical. This was, probably 2 or 3 years later that he wrote about that. And there's many other things also that refer to the wandering minstrel. As for tunes, though, I haven't looked up the wandering minstrel tune that you're mentioning there, and there could be a connection. That's exactly the sort of lead that I would like to sort of chase down a bit. There's certainly been other suggestions of connections with Irish tunes. Paddywhack is the other one, but I don't find that particularly close. And my current sort of thinking is that in fact this could well be an adaptation of a well-known Irish tune that was in Duple time, March time, and it's been changed to triple.
Thank you, Julia.
It's certainly a very familiar tune in Irish songs. I think we would know it by a different name, probably.
We had a comment from Oscar.
Yeah, Oscar had a few things. He was just saying that Charles Cochrane, Signor de Vega, was the wandering minstrel in question, the disguised. David pointing out, of course, the wandering minstrel from Mikado. But Oscar's saying that there's a generational shift in two ways. Theatrically, from an expectation that a favorite song would be interpolated to an expectation that songs will be fixed. And from a generation who knew Villikins as a parody, relying on the William and Diana original, to one that knows Villikins only in its own right. Is this the Victorians being straighter than the Georgians again? This is an epic excavation. Thank you, Julia.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I think we're going to have to go to tea and coffee now for those of us in the hall. Those of you at home can do what you like, and we'll be back here at past.
Yeah, there's tea and coffee just outside here. So
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.